Vince Lombardi was 67 when the final chapter of his life closed. But even in his last days, the weight of perfection still followed him like a shadow he could never outrun. For decades, America saw him as the saint of discipline, the coach who turned chaos into order and forged champions through fire. His name became immortal. His philosophy became gospel. His image became untouchable. Yet behind the trophies and the sermons and the relentless pursuit of excellence, there were truths he rarely allowed anyone to see. Truths about the 5 rivalries, betrayals, and confrontations that shaped him long before the world called him a legend. These were not simple disagreements. They were battles that carved scars into his career and spirit. They revealed a man at war, not only with opponents, but with players, owners, and even himself. They exposed the price he paid to maintain a reputation built on order, control, and absolute dominance. And they showed how the very perfection he demanded from others often hid the imperfections he feared most. Why would a man revered by his players still carry grudges so deeply? Why would a coach who preached unity foster conflicts that never truly died? And why did the quest for greatness leave him haunted by the people he could never forgive? Today, in the twilight of his legacy, we uncover the 5 hidden truths Vince Lombardi never escaped, and the dark side of perfection he spent a lifetime trying to master. Vince Lombardi's rise did not begin in a stadium filled with roaring crowds. It began in the quiet corners of New York, in classrooms and practice fields, where he built himself, piece by piece, through discipline so strict, it bordered on punishment. He was not born a football giant. He forged himself into one through sheer will, a determination that made him both admired and feared. Long before he ever stepped onto the frozen fields of Green Bay. When he arrived in Wisconsin in the late 1950s, the Packers were a fractured team struggling with identity. Lombardi saw more than failure. He saw raw material waiting to be shaped, and he knew exactly how he would shape it. He demanded obedience, order, and absolute precision. Players who walked into his locker room understood they were entering a world where excuses did not exist. Every detail mattered. Every mistake echoed. Every lapse triggered consequences that pushed them to the edge of their endurance. His voice carried a weight that could break a man or build him, depending on how he responded. To Lombardi, football was not a game. It was a test of character. It was a battlefield where weakness could never be tolerated. Yet behind the authority he wielded, there was a deeper truth. Lombardi feared chaos. He feared the idea that the world could not be controlled, that effort alone might not be enough. His obsession with order became a shield, something he clung to as tightly as his playbook. The Packers became the perfect vessel for his philosophy. Under his command, they transformed from a struggling franchise into a dynasty that defined an era. They won championships, not through talent alone, but through a culture of relentlessness that reflected Lombardi's inner world. The legend grew quickly. Newspapers praised his intellect. Broadcasters admired his clarity. Opponents respected his brutality. But success brought scrutiny, and scrutiny exposed pressure. Lombardi began fighting battles that went far beyond the sidelines. He clashed with owners who questioned his authority. He challenged players who could not meet his impossible standards. He confronted a culture that resisted his strict moral code. And in the process, he created rivalries that would follow him for decades. The deeper he pushed toward perfection, the more conflict he left in his wake. He drove his men to greatness, but also to resentment. He delivered victories that changed the league, but carried bitterness from the relationships he fractured. Lombardi's brilliance was undeniable, but it came with a cost. The cost shaped the 5 hidden truths that defined the man behind the myth. The truths he rarely spoke aloud, the ones he carried long after the cheers faded. Before Vince Lombardi became the face of iron discipline in Green Bay, he stood side by side with Tom Landry in New York, 2 young coordinators who shaped the Giants into a defensive and offensive machine. Landry was the embodiment of composure, a man carved from stillness rather than fire. He studied film with the patience of a mathematician and coached with the calm certainty of a surgeon. Where Lombardi roared, Landry whispered. Where Lombardi demanded, Landry guided. Together, they built one of the most sophisticated staffs in football. But beneath the harmony, simmered tension neither man fully acknowledged. The friction between the two did not stem from a single event. It grew from philosophy, identity, and the desire to define greatness on personal terms. Lombardi saw the game through emotion and force. Landry saw it through structure and logic. Their differences fed a competitive spark that sharpened both men, but also carved distance between them. Each believed his path was the superior one. Each felt the Giants relied on him more, and when head coaching opportunities arose, both watched closely to see who the league viewed as the true architect of New York's success. Landry wanted ascension. Lombardi wanted validation. Only one would get the moment he believed he deserved. The moment the rivalry crystallized came in 1959, when Green Bay offered Lombardi its head coaching job. For years he had believed his future belonged in New York, that the Giants would reward his loyalty and intensity with the chance to lead. Instead, the organization hesitated. They admired Lombardi, but they trusted Landry's steady presence more. Behind closed doors, conversations unfolded that would never be fully revealed to the public. But the outcome was unmistakable. The Giants did not choose Lombardi. They chose to wait. They chose Landry first, in everything except title. When Lombardi walked out of the franchise headquarters for the last time, he carried both opportunity and injury. In Green Bay he built a dynasty, but the shadow of Landry followed him. Whenever the Cowboys innovated, whenever victory came through Landry's quiet genius, Lombardi heard echoes of the past. The league saw them as twin pillars of modern coaching. But Lombardi knew their paths split the moment the Giants hesitated. That hesitation turned into the rivalry he rarely voiced, yet always felt. Their most symbolic confrontation came on the frozen sidelines of the 1966 championship game. Lombardi's Packers against Landry's Cowboys. Order against fire. Control against emotion. The game tightened in the final minutes as Dallas pressed toward the end zone. Lombardi clenched his jaw with the weight of history behind him. Landry stood still, eyes cold, mind calculating. When Green Bay's defense delivered the final stop, the stadium erupted. But for Lombardi, the victory held a deeper meaning. He had defeated not just a team, but a ghost from the past. Lombardi respected Landry, but he never forgot the sting of being overlooked, while the organization leaned toward his counterpart. It was the quiet rivalry he rarely named, one built not on anger, but on a wound that never fully healed. The cold truth was simple. Lombardi spent a lifetime proving that the Giants chose wrong. And though he rose to greatness, he carried that rivalry with him until the end. The grudge lived on. In the early glory years of Green Bay, the public saw a united machine. Players followed Lombardi with near religious devotion, and victories piled up, until the Packers stood alone atop professional football. But behind the closed doors of Lambeau Field sat another force in his life, one that did not wear pads or run drills. The Green Bay front office, led by executives who valued control as much as Lombardi valued authority, became one of the most complex relationships of his career. They admired him, relied on him, even feared him at times. Yet they never surrendered power completely. The tension between Lombardi and the Packer hierarchy developed slowly. Lombardi demanded absolute control over football operations. He believed greatness could not be shared. Every roster decision, every staff appointment, every strategic direction had to follow his vision without interference. The front office respected his results, but they also feared the consequences of giving one man unchecked influence. Over time, this fear hardened into boundaries, small at first, then increasingly pronounced. Lombardi pushed. The executives resisted. Each believed they were protecting the franchise, but their definitions of protection differed radically. The conflict became a chess match between authority and stability, with neither side willing to concede ground. The rivalry reached its peak during the mid-1960s, when Green Bay's dynasty stood at its height. Success amplified Lombardi's confidence, and with every championship ring, he felt the right to expand his reach. The turning point came when he demanded sweeping personnel authority, insisting that the team's future required a streamlined chain of command with him at the top. The executives, though grateful for his achievements, refused. They believed no coach, regardless of brilliance, should wield total power. When the tension finally spilled into public view, it shocked the league. Lombardi, the man who built Green Bay's identity, was suddenly confronted with the reality that he could not control everything. What made the conflict unforgettable was how it changed him. The fire that once fueled his players now turned inward. He saw the resistance not as disagreement, but as betrayal. Meetings grew cold. Conversations sharpened. The Packers continued to win. But off the field, a fracture widened that no championship could repair. By 1968, the relationship had deteriorated so deeply that Lombardi accepted the role of general manager in Washington. It was not ambition that drove him there. It was escape. He left Green Bay with trophies in his hands and bitterness in his heart, convinced that the executives he carried to greatness had ultimately denied him the autonomy he believed he earned. Lombardi never forgave the front office for limiting his authority. He respected the franchise, loved the town, cherished the team, but the leadership above him remained a source of unresolved conflict. To him, the cold truth was undeniable. He had given Green Bay a dynasty, and in return they drew lines he could not cross. The grudge lived on in silence, a reminder that even the greatest coach of his era could be defeated not by opponents on the field, but by power struggles behind the walls of his own empire. Paul Hornung entered Green Bay as the kind of star who commanded attention without effort. Handsome, confident, and naturally gifted, he embodied the glamorous image the league longed to promote. Nicknamed the Golden Boy, he was the player fans adored and reporters chased. To the public he was charming. To teammates he was magnetic. To Lombardi he was both a treasure and a threat. Hornung represented everything the coach admired in talent, but feared in lifestyle. Their relationship would become one of the most complicated dynamics of the Packers dynasty. Hornung's brilliance on the field collided with his impulsive life off it. He partied often, slept little, broke curfews, and lived with a freedom that contradicted the rigid culture Lombardi enforced. To Lombardi, discipline was sacred. It was the foundation of greatness. To Hornung, life extended far beyond the white lines. Their clash was not personal. It was philosophical. Lombardi saw Hornung's habits as cracks in the team structure. Hornung saw Lombardi's rules as chains that restricted human nature. The more Lombardi tightened his grip, the more Hornung drifted toward temptation. Their conflict grew into a battle between perfection and pleasure, order and instinct. The defining moment arrived in 1963, when Hornung was suspended for gambling on NFL games. The league's announcement shocked the country, but no one felt the impact more deeply than Lombardi. He viewed the scandal not just as a violation of league rules, but as a personal betrayal of the culture he built. The Golden Boy, the player he trusted to carry the offense, had tarnished the Packers' image in a way Lombardi considered unforgivable. Yet the most cinematic scene took place far from cameras. Behind closed doors, Lombardi met Hornung with a fury that masked something deeper than anger. He was hurt. Still, when the suspension lifted, Lombardi did something no one expected. He stood by Hornung publicly, telling the league that he wanted his player back without hesitation. In reality, this was not forgiveness. It was strategy. Lombardi knew the Packers needed Hornung's talent to preserve their dominance. But beneath the public endorsement lay resentment. The scandal had forced Lombardi to compromise the absolute code he preached. Every time Hornung stepped onto the field afterward, Lombardi saw both brilliance and the reminder of a failure that threatened his carefully crafted order. When Hornung delivered key performances in championship seasons, Lombardi celebrated with the team. But internally he felt the weight of contradiction. He relied on a man who embodied the chaos he despised. It was a victory wrapped in bitterness. Lombardi respected Hornung's ability but never fully forgave the breach of trust. The cold truth was clear. Hornung had forced Lombardi to bend his sacred principles, and Lombardi never forgot the fracture that caused. Even as they lifted trophies together, The tension lingered like an unspoken confession. The grudge lived on. Bart Starr was not the kind of quarterback Lombardi typically celebrated. He lacked flash, avoided attention, and carried himself with a humility that bordered on self-erasure. Yet beneath that quiet exterior lay a mind built for precision and a heart built for resilience. He became the stabilizing force of the Packers dynasty. The calm within Lombardi's storm. To the nation, he was a symbol of composure. To teammates, he was the anchor that held the offense together. But for Lombardi, Starr was something far more complex. He was both indispensable and quietly defiant in ways that created an unexpected tension. The conflict between Lombardi and Starr did not erupt through fights or scandals. It grew through control. Lombardi demanded that every decision reflect his philosophy. Starr believed leadership required autonomy. He studied defenses with a cerebral intensity that sometimes led him to override Lombardi's preferred calls. At first, the coach dismissed these adjustments as youthful instinct, but as Starr matured, his confidence expanded. He began making changes on the field that deviated from Lombardi's rigid expectations. To Lombardi, this signaled a loss of order. To Starr, it marked the evolution of a quarterback who understood the flow of the game as deeply as his coach. Their defining confrontation arrived in the freezing winter of 1967. During the legendary Ice Bowl, temperatures fell to extremes that turned breath into frost and grass into stone. The game crawled into its final moments, with the Packers trailing and tension mounting. Starr approached Lombardi and insisted he could sneak the ball across the goal line, rather than rely on the outside run Lombardi favored. The request challenged the coach's authority, at a moment when control mattered most. Lombardi stared at him, weighing trust against discipline, fear against faith. Starr repeated the request with quiet certainty. In that instant, Lombardi faced the one decision he had always tried to avoid. He had to surrender control. He nodded once. The offense returned to the field. Starr lined up, the crowd bracing against the cold, as if the air itself feared what would happen next. With the snap came a surge of desperation and will. Starr pushed forward, forcing his way into the end zone for one of the most iconic plays in NFL history. The stadium erupted, but Lombardi remained still for a moment longer than usual. Victory had come through intuition he did not command. It was a triumph that exposed his deepest conflict. His quarterback had succeeded not by following orders, but by trusting himself. Lombardi admired Starr, but admiration did not erase tension. The cold truth remained. Starr had become a leader in his own right, one who occasionally stepped beyond Lombardi's reach. Lombardi respected the results, yet part of him never fully accepted the moments when control slipped from his hands. The grudge lived on in silence, shaped by pride as much as by legacy. Before Lombardi clashed with owners, questioned quarterbacks, or battled opposing coaches, there was one adversary who shaped him more profoundly than any man on a sideline. That adversary lived in every decision he made, every practice he commanded, every standard he enforced. It was the version of himself he believed he had to be. Lombardi carried within him a constant companion, a relentless judge who demanded perfection without pause. To the public, he appeared unshakable. To his players, he appeared unbreakable. Yet behind the closed doors of his own mind, he fought a quieter, deeper battle that never allowed him rest. Lombardi's inner conflict came from the unbearable weight of expectation. He believed excellence was the only acceptable path through life. A belief forged in childhood, strengthened in his early coaching years, and hardened in Green Bay. But the more success he achieved, the higher his internal bar climbed. Every victory became insufficient. Every mistake became a personal failure. He drove himself mercilessly, unable to tolerate softness or doubt. This inner pressure defined his coaching brilliance, but it also fueled an unending war with his own humanity. He feared losing control, feared showing weakness, feared becoming anything less than the legend others expected. The most revealing moment of Lombardi's private struggle unfolded not during a championship game but in the lonely hours after one. Following the Packers' triumph in the first Super Bowl, Reporters celebrated him as the greatest coach the sport had produced. His players cheered. The league praised his genius. Yet when he returned to his office, long after the stadium had emptied, he did not bask in victory. Instead, he sat alone at his desk with a pen in his hand, rewriting practice schedules and analyzing errors only he noticed. For Lombardi, the celebration was already over. The next battle had already begun. His reflection in the office window became the silent rival he could not escape. It stared back at him with all the pressure, regret, and ambition he tried so hard to conceal. Lombardi once admitted privately that he never felt satisfaction in success. The more he won, the more he feared what would come next. This fear created invisible cracks in his relationships, widened the distance between him and his players, and forced him into a cycle of self-judgment that no trophy could interrupt. The breaking point arrived during his final years in Washington. His health deteriorated, but his expectations did not. He pushed himself through pain, exhaustion, and illness, because stepping back felt like surrender. Even those who respected him most saw the weight he carried, but could not reach the core of his struggle. Lombardi never allowed vulnerability to surface. He battled his own reflection until the very end. Lombardi's greatest rival was never Tom Landry, the Green Bay front office, Paul Hornung, or Bart Starr. It was the impossible standard he imposed on himself. The cold truth was simple. He demanded perfection from others because he feared falling short of it within himself. And though he shaped a dynasty, the war inside him never ceased. The grudge lived on, carved into the silence he carried deeper than any public rivalry. Jim Taylor was the kind of player Lombardi claimed to admire. Tough, relentless, and brutally physical, he ran with a fury that turned every carry into a test of courage. Fans loved him, teammates respected him, opponents feared him. But for Lombardi, Taylor was a complication wrapped in strength. He was the rare player who matched Lombardi's intensity, not with obedience, but with defiance. Where others submitted, Taylor pushed back. Where others nodded, he argued. Their relationship carried the weight of two forces that refused to yield. The tension began when Taylor demanded the one thing Lombardi struggled to tolerate: independence. He wanted control over his contracts. He wanted recognition equal to his production, and he wanted respect delivered without fear. Lombardi valued Taylor's toughness, but distrusted his challenge to authority. Their dynamic soon evolved into a private rivalry, one rooted not in hatred, but in the clash between dominance and pride. The most telling moment arrived during the mid-1960s, when Taylor's contract negotiations became a battle of wills. Lombardi offered terms he believed were fair. Taylor disagreed. He stood his ground, with a stubbornness that mirrored Lombardi's own. The coach saw it as rebellion. The player saw it as dignity. When Taylor ultimately chose to leave Green Bay for New Orleans, the decision cut deeper than Lombardi ever admitted publicly. It was the first time a key piece of his dynasty walked away because he refused to bend. The cold truth was that Taylor represented a challenge Lombardi could not solve. He could coach him, win with him, admire him, but he could never control him. And in Lombardi's world, that made Jim Taylor the perfect outsider in the story of his legacy. Vince Lombardi's life was built on conflict, not the kind fought between helmets and goalposts, but the kind waged in boardrooms, locker rooms, and the quiet spaces where a man confronts the truth he has spent years avoiding. To understand his journey is to understand that greatness did not emerge from harmony. It emerged from tension. It emerged from friction. And most of all, it emerged from battles that shaped him as much as they scarred him. Each rivalry marked a turning point in his evolution. With Tom Landry, Lombardi confronted the fear of being overshadowed. They were two young architects standing in the same room, building the same vision, yet chasing different forms of validation. That rivalry pushed Lombardi to define himself not as one half of a partnership, but as the singular force he believed he was destined to become. Without Landry standing on the opposite sideline, Lombardi's need to prove himself might never have burned so fiercely. With the Green Bay front office, he faced the reality that control even for a man like Lombardi, was not absolute. He forged a dynasty through discipline. Yet the very institution he elevated placed boundaries around him. That resistance revealed the vulnerability beneath his authority. It reminded him that his power was built on results, not coronation. The fracture that followed echoed through the later years of his life, shaping decisions he made in Washington and deepening the belief that leadership was a responsibility he alone understood. Paul Hornung forced Lombardi to confront the limits of discipline. Hornung's brilliance, his recklessness, and his charm all clashed with the doctrine Lombardi preached. Yet Lombardi needed him. That dependence unsettled the coach more than the scandal itself. Hornung represented the chaos Lombardi tried desperately to push out of the world. The reminder that no matter how tightly he constructed a system, human nature would always slip through the cracks. Their relationship exposed the tension between order and imperfection, a tension that followed Lombardi even when victories drowned out the noise. Bart Starr revealed something deeper still. He showed Lombardi that leadership could exist without fire, volume, or intimidation. Starr led quietly, thoughtfully, and with a calm that contrasted Lombardi's relentless energy. When Starr took control during the Ice Bowl, it was more than a moment of strategy. It was a moment that challenged Lombardi's identity. Starr's success proved that autonomy had value, that authority could be shared without dissolving the foundation of a team. Lombardi admired him deeply. Yet the unease lingered, a reminder that greatness could be achieved in ways he did not fully understand. But the greatest confrontation, the one that tied every rivalry together, came from within. Lombardi spent his life chasing a standard that no man could sustain. He demanded flawlessness from players because he feared failure inside himself. He pushed teams to the brink because he pushed himself further still. Every victory felt temporary. Every season felt like a test he might one day fail. His greatest fear was not losing games. It was losing control. Control of teams, control of outcomes, control of the narrative, control of the image he carried like armor. By the end of his life, that armor had grown heavy. In Washington, he coached with the same fire. Yet those closest to him recognized the strain. Age did not soften him. Illness did not slow him. He kept pushing, kept demanding, kept striving toward an ideal that no longer aligned with the limits of his body. The man who transformed Green Bay into a cathedral of excellence now wrestled with mortality, a reality he could not outwork or intimidate. Yet in those late years came a quieter truth. The rivalries that marked his journey did not diminish him. They defined him. Landry sharpened him. The front office tested him. Hornung forced him to reconsider the boundaries of discipline. Starr illuminated the power of trust. Even his inner battles fueled the intensity that made him a legend. Without conflict, Lombardi would not have risen. Without pressure, he would not have transformed a struggling franchise into a dynasty. Without the impossible standards he carried, he might never have become the symbol of greatness that generations revere. Lombardi died in 1970 at the age of 57, leaving behind a collection of championships and a mythology built on certainty. But the reality beneath the mythology was far more compelling. His legacy was not formed solely from victories. It was shaped by the adversaries he confronted, the truths he wrestled with, and the imperfections he tried desperately to overcome. In the end, the Lombardi Trophy was named not after a man who achieved perfection, but after a man who spent his entire life chasing it. The legacy he left behind was not a spotless monument. It was a testament to struggle, a testament to conflict, a testament to a man who believed that greatness was forged in fire, sharpened by rivalry, and held together by the will to keep moving forward, even when the world pressed against him from every direction. Now that the final truth behind Vince Lombardi's legacy has been uncovered, the real question falls to you. Which of these hidden rivalries shaped him the most? Was it the quiet chess match with Tom Landry? The power struggle inside Green Bay's front office? The fragile trust with Paul Hornung? The silent challenge of Bart Starr? Or the impossible battle he fought against himself? Each confrontation carved a different line into his story. Each revealed a layer of the man that trophies alone could never explain. Lombardi's greatness did not grow from victories. It grew from conflict, sacrifice, and the relentless need to control a world that refused to bend completely to his will. As you reflect on his journey, consider what these truths say about the cost of perfection. Would Lombardi have become a legend without these battles? Or did the battles define him more than the championships ever could? And do you believe the weight he carried made him stronger, or slowly tore him apart? Tell me in the comments which rivalry surprised you the most, or which moment changed the way you see this iconic coach. Your perspective helps shape the next story we uncover, and brings new life to the hidden histories that shaped football's golden age. If you want more documentaries that reveal the darker corners of NFL history, the feuds that shaped legends, and the untold truths behind the greatest names of the 1960s through 1990s, subscribe to NFL Hidden Truths. New stories arrive every week, each one pulling back another layer of the sport's most unforgettable figures. Stay with us as we continue exploring the rivalries, the betrayals, and the unseen forces that built the world of football as we know it.